new gaming hardware in consoles and PCs used to offer a massive improvement to what you would see visually. Like the PlayStation 1 era PC games and hardware, jumping up to the PS2, you got a much more realistic city environments and all of that. And jumping up to the PlayStation 3, extremely higher resolution, a lot more realistic cities, way more cars and NPCs. And then the PlayStation 4, you're starting to see a lot less jaggies. You're getting way more density in the environments. Now the PlayStation 5 takes that to another level, but it's getting a little harder to see the improvement. And then we're also reaching the PC kind of space where PCs can push beyond even what the PS5 is capable of, and consoles are getting like a PS5 Pro, and people are starting to think about what's going to be a PS6. And does it feel like we're starting to get into the era of diminishing returns? And this is just one aspect of this. I also was seeing this being brought up when I was talking about CPU reviews. So the latest generation of Intel CPUs came out, and they were a regression in performance. And what was weird is, I saw a lot of the expected disappointment. I had disappointment because I'm like, generally we get new generations of CPUs and performance improves at around the same price, meaning you can now buy more performance for the same price no matter what budget range you were in. So this was a good thing for consumers, and generally that went along with being able to run games with more dense city environments at higher frame rates and things like that. We were getting these big, it wasn't just, putting a better part in my PC and being like, cool, I feel good about myself because I upgraded it. Like the PCs that could run this type of game and the PCs that could run this type of game are very different PCs, right? But luckily, the price for those PCs actually isn't, drastically different over time, especially if you would adjust for inflation. So if we start to see, hardware performance start to stagnate, where it's not getting that much better, at least for gaming performance, again, it's obvious to see why that's disappointing, but that's why I was initially surprised to see a lot of comments on my video, as well as others, about the new generation of CPUs, and AMD CPUs didn't get that much of a generational leap either. I saw a lot of people actually happy, kind of relieved. And again, initially that caught me off guard because of the classic way of looking at this. But when I read a little more of the details, even replied to a few of these to try to inquire further, like, wait, you're happy to see stagnation in performance for hardware? Like, that seems kind of wrong for a consumer. Some people were pointing out, well, no, this just means I get to stay on my hardware longer without feeling like I'm falling behind. And I was like, okay, all right. Now, usually in a traditional situation, I'd be like, I don't want to stay here if this kind of stuff is becoming available. You know what I mean? Like if you just stuck on this PC. But I think what people are getting at is that we're starting to get into an era of diminishing returns, where it feels like you're spending so much more money on a more powerful system, but what are you even getting for it? Are games getting better? Are they doing things they couldn't do before? Do they even look better, even if they seem to require twice as powerful hardware? I mean, take a look at this. Like, for example, here is looking at Black Myth Wukong running at its max settings versus my more optimized setting choices when this game came out. And I'd really like to just play this video for a second, and I want you to just look at the side-by-side. And if we don't freeze frame this, and you're not looking at just the frame rate they're running at, like, is there much visual difference here? Do you feel like you're going from, PS1 era to PS2 era, or PS3 to PS4, or PS4 to PS5 kind of jumps? Well, I mean, the performance cost here is pretty dramatic. The optimized settings are running at 2.35 times the performance. Now, this is on an RTX 3060 at 1080p resolution, and it's the cinematic settings versus my more optimized settings, but they're both running at the same resolution. I'm not even playing around with resolution scaling at this point in the video. So, I mean, think about what that means in terms of PC hardware. To get 2.4 times the performance, we're talking going from an RTX 3060 to like a 4070 Ti Super. If you're talking about just raw brute forcing that kind of performance gain, and yet just slightly turning down the graphics in a way that is almost not even noticeable gets you that same performance uplift. I think this is where you get the thing where people are really feeling like game optimization is at an all-time low. And I think some games are truly unoptimized from the actual sense of the word. But I think another piece of this is just, people claim games don't look any better than they used to, and that's not true. On average, I think games are generally looking better than they used to. But it's getting harder to notice those improved graphics, especially given the massive performance cost that comes along with them. And that's the big issue. And that's where, again, it's like in these side-by-sides, I think you can easily spot the difference. And I could ask my, my 5-year-old daughter to come in here, and she could easily tell you which one of these looks better and why in a split second. Especially if these were full screen and not these little slivers. I could ask my mom, who does not play video games, has no interest in video games, and she's easily going to spot the differences here and which ones are looking better and more realistic. But I'm guessing a bunch of you watching this video freeze-framed right now are having a little trouble spotting the difference between these two images. And one is running 2.35 times faster than the other, right? That is absolutely crazy when you think about that. So the types of graphical improvements that we are getting are becoming incredibly expensive to make these minuscule improvements to the image. And again, I'm not saying they don't look better. I did a video just recently talking about the Horizon Zero Dawn remaster. And if you look at the remaster on the left and the original on the right, you can absolutely tell there's more detail here. There's less detail here. Look at these pillars. There's more detail here, less detail here. Grass in the distance. There's more grass in the distance visible here, less here. If you freeze frame it, you can absolutely tell the remaster looks better. But this video was talking about performance cost, right? Where you're looking at the updated system requirements being considerably more demanding than the old version of the game, which had these system requirements. Again, watch that video if you want the details. But the point is, yes, if you freeze frame it, you can tell it looks better. But are you getting that kind of mind-blowing generational upgrade from this side-by-side, right? That you used to get from a PS1 to a PS2 or a PS2 to a PS3. But you're talking about a similar hardware jump in terms of what's required to deliver that kind of graphical upgrade, which is, again, it's that diminishing returns. And another way of saying it is, I read a recent article about, it was an interview with a former PlayStation executive, specifically Layden, who had a 30-year career at Sony and served as the CEO of SIE America and chairman of Worldwide Studios. Video Game Chronicles. By the way, all my sources will be linked in the video description. I'm relying on a lot of other people's graphics comparisons, some of my own videos, some text articles. All of them will be in the video description if you want to follow any of these, at your own leisure and credit the original sources and all that. Anyway, but he's being asked about if the pursuit of incrementally more powerful consoles can continue sustainably in the future, considering the increasing development costs, both for the consoles themselves and the game developers who are trying to actually implement these better graphics. Because it's expensive from both hardware standpoint and a game development cost, literal in dollars standpoint. Now, he says we've done these things this way for 30 years. Every generation, those costs went up and we realigned with it. But we've reached a precipice now where the center can't hold. We cannot continue to do things that we have done before. He also jumps into the fact that when talking about these graphical differences, he's saying it's plateaued. We're at the stage of hardware development that I call only dogs can hear the difference. If you're playing your game and sunlight is coming through your window onto your TV, you're not seeing any ray tracing. It has to be super optimal. You have to have an 8K monitor in a dark room to see these things. Now, he's obviously exaggerating about here a bit about needing a literal 8K monitor in a dark room to see the difference for some of these graphical upgrades. But like only a little bit. His main point here is the only dogs can hear the difference thing. In other words, again, go back to this optimized setting versus max setting thing I had going here. This is the only dogs can hear the difference, right? Like, is there a difference? Yes. Is it hard to spot the difference? Yes. Is it a massive performance cost for that tiny visual upgrade? Yes. Okay. And this is where people's frustration, I think, is really coming from, and why I'm getting the initially unexpected reaction to of celebration regarding stagnating hardware. Because I'm wondering, and this is an honest question for you guys, respond in the comment section. Would you actually be happy if PCs, consoles, games in general, all of it, basically just decided graphics are good enough, hardware's good enough, we're going to stop here. We'll keep making new games, we'll push game development, we'll push game design, but within the constraints of the hardware we have now. Would you be happier if you only had to upgrade your PC or your console if it literally got so old the parts literally just wore out and you needed new ones because they broke, right? Because we're just not used to that in the PC tech gaming console kind of space. Because it used to be the case that game graphics and hardware was advancing at such a rapid pace that the benefits in both just visuals and just literal game design, because you could just have a more complex environment and more complex systems with more powerful hardware and just tell a more visually impactful story. And there is some sense to that, right? We used to just constantly be getting these upgrades. But I mean, once you're here, how much better do you need to be? You see what I'm saying, right? Now, I think a lot of people's response to that is the next step forward is ray tracing. But I think with that, it's actually, I think path tracing is actually the step forward. Another interesting video that I think really ties into all of this as well is a recent Hardware Unboxed video where Tim was going through a ton of ray tracing enabled games and trying to decide, is ray tracing, not even just from a performance standpoint, but is ray tracing just transforming the visuals into an obviously significantly better visual experience, right? And given the massive number of games tested, I think it was something like 36 games or something like that, there was only a handful of games that he categorized. Now, admittedly, this has to be kind of a personally subjective sort of experience. You can do side-by-sides and try to measure as objectively as you can, but whether you consider it significantly transformed or just a little bit better or only a dog can hear it is in some sense a personal decision, right? But anyway, he tried to be as objective as he could, and I highly recommend this. Again, we'll link this in the video description as well. Saying, okay, Cyberpunk 2077's RT Overdrive mode transforms visuals significantly. And I would agree with that. Alan Wake 2's RT High mode, which again is one of those big like full path tracing mode type experience. I'd agree with that. Metro Exodus is another good example. When we get to the generally better overall category, there's a lot more games here. But still, there's a lot of games where you're like, it's actually literally looks worse or no improvement at all. Or you have to look really closely to see the difference. Or it looks different, but is it better, right? You got all of that. So that's kind of the interesting take here, where I do think to see a significantly transformed game, path-traced lighting and reflections and global illumination can deliver that. Again, Cyberpunk's RT Overdrive mode is an example of that. But again, there's the question like, but at what cost, right, performance-wise? Because to run Cyberpunk 2077's RT Overdrive mode at like 60 FPS at 1080p, you need an RTX 4090. I'm serious. Other GPUs can get to 60 FPS and pass that at higher resolutions, but relying on rendering resolution changes, right, using DLSS and things like that. In other words, this is cripplingly difficult to do, even on incredibly powerful and expensive hardware. And if you want to, so like, is that what a PS6 is going to do? Because I just don't think that you can get a console delivering that, like RTX 4090 levels of ray tracing performance at a console level price anytime in the next few years. And this is another place where performance stagnation makes that even less likely. It's getting harder to deliver better performance without just blowing budgets like out the window. Here's, if we want to visualize that, for example, the current PlayStation 5 is somewhere along the lines of an RX 6700 level of non-RT performance. It's not, of RT performance. I should say that. Sorry, yeah. RX 6700-ish performance. If I want to grab a popular new GPU that you might have some experience with, an RTX 4060 is not super far off from console level performance and actually has better ray tracing performance. Although it doesn't have as much VRAM, so we kind of ignore that. But what I'm trying to get at here is visualizing how much performance jump you would need from consoles to get anywhere near that kind of path tracing sort of experience. An RTX 4090 is like 3 times the performance, and that's compared to the RTX 4060. So if we're talking in path tracing, it's more than 3 times the performance, because a 4090 is crushing even like a 7900 XTX, especially in RT performance. Like the generational upgrade we would need is just mind-boggling. And I don't know when we're going to get there, especially if consoles continue to go with AMD hardware, which all signs point to them doing, right? So if your next if your next frontier of mind-blowing visuals is fully path-traced games, and we're along the lines of Cyberpunk's RT Overdrive mode, when does console game development get there? PS6, PS7, PS8? And do these generational improvements even make sense at that point, right? We've got the former PlayStation exec just talking about like it's barely noticeable. We're needing a complete redesign of the whole business model of gaming. It's time for a real hard reset on the business model, a hard reset on what it is to be a video game. So, so what is my point on all of this? I mean, along with the diminishing returns in improving visuals, we have the opposite effect going on with the cost of game development. Game development for AAA games is getting mind-blowingly expensive. Cyberpunk 2077, again, this is an article here from ejaw.net. All my sources will be in the video description. So according to them, and trying to adjust for inflation, I think this article is about a year old now, so adjusted for inflation up to about a year ago, Cyberpunk over $300 million, whereas a big AAA game like Halo 4 in 2012, even adjusted for inflation, we're talking around $100 million. Final Fantasy 15 back in 2016 was already pushing $300 million. I think the second number here is, the adjusted for inflation. Anyway, the point is, like, games are getting incredibly expensive. It's not uncommon for a game to have a $250 million budget. And so the amount of like sales they need to do that, and why is it getting so expensive? There's a lot of reasons, but part of it is the fact that designing graphics like this is a lot more expensive than designing graphics like this. And it's true that if you could get to the point where you could just rely on path tracing to handle a lot of the lighting systems and everything like that, so game developers didn't have to spend time on a lot of that other stuff, if we got to that point, that might start to actually finally help out game development, budgets. We're not there yet. We're just not there yet. And so if you're still having to do all the rasterized stuff and just adding in these features on top of it, it's still not even really helping game development. So what I'm getting at is I feel like we're in a bit of a crisis in both gaming itself, at least AAA gaming, as well as gaming hardware. And that's what my channel focuses more on, right, is the specifically PC hardware aspect of this. But I think there's just a massive storm of issues going on right now that are indicating that the current business model for both the hardware side of gaming PCs and gaming consoles, the whole paradigm and business model of just continually pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing is getting both harder to do technically, right? We're seeing like big generational performance improvements seem to be being harder to accomplish and more expensive, and game development is getting more expensive. And a lot of people, I think, are starting to just question this whole thing, right? So, I mean, personally, I think there's still definitely room, for these increases in hardware. But I really do think it's true that it's getting harder to see the benefit. It's not that they're not there, but it's getting harder to see. And it's getting expensive to experience those benefits, right? So I do wonder if at some point, right, we reach a point where stagnation happens from like a visual and hardware perspective, and whether or not that's actually the end of the world, right? Because we did have the people happy with their CPUs not getting faster because it means you can just keep your system longer. Would you be happy? Again, let me know in the comment section if you could just keep your gaming PC or your gaming console into like indefinitely, or at least until it actually physically the hardware actually breaks down, rather than because you're outdated and you can't keep up with the latest tech. Because again, like I said, kind of my thesis here, it used to be the case that upgrading your hardware brought you real, meaningful gains. And it's just getting harder to see them, right? It's not that they're not there, but it's getting really hard to see. So at what point does the whole game development and console market just have a whole redesign, a rethink of everything? Because there's a lot of money involved here for both the consumers buying the games and the hardware and the people developing the games and the hardware. And I don't know, it's weird because our whole economy, this whole system is based on like infinite exponential growth. And I don't know, it feels like it was doing that exponential growth thing and it's starting to kind of peter out. Anyway, let me know your guys' thoughts and feelings on this whole situation in the comments. This was more of just kind of, I don't know if rant's the right word, but just, I've just been getting a lot of these feelings and want to do one video that kind of wraps it all together and see what you guys thought about it. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I hope all of you have an excellent day.